Welcome back to the Old Photo Vault channel. Stillness among the towers. Bakersfield oil fields, 1934. The photograph was taken on a quiet afternoon when the men had stepped away for lunch and the yard lay open and unsupervised. Rusted gears rested in loose circles, pipes stacked like firewood. And behind them, the oil towers rose patiently, repeating themselves into the hills. In the middle sat a small stone Buddha, placed there by someone who thought it might bring calm to the machinery. Its hands were folded. Its face looked clean, almost recently washed. When the image was developed, the owner noticed the statue's shadow did not match the sun. It leaned toward the scrap, not away from it. Each time he studied the print, the shadow seemed closer, as if kneeling too. Old workers later said a temple once stood near the first well, dismantled when drilling began. The Buddha remained still in the yard, but the photograph suggests it learned to stay when everything else was taken apart. The vigil table, provincial courtyard, 1921. It looks like a formal duty, the kind carried out with clean hands and practiced stillness. Two young guards stand facing each other, rifles held carefully, boots aligned with the edge of the stone floor. Between them rests the coffin, draped simply, as though cloth could soften its weight. Leaves hang overhead, casting mild shadows that seem polite enough. At first, nothing appears wrong. Then the longer you look, the more the space beneath the table insists on itself. A pale shape gathers there, narrow at the shoulders, tapering like breath made visible on cold glass. It does not touch the ground. It does not reach upward. It waits. Records say the man inside the coffin died far from home, returned only for appearances. The guards later swore they felt watched, but only from below. When the photograph was printed, the shape was already there, standing exactly where a body would remember being laid down, the chair that waited. County Hospital Annex, 2 to 9. The hallway looks ordinary enough, freshly cleaned, the lights spaced evenly as if measured by habit. Doors line the left wall, most of them shut, one left ajar for air. A wheelchair rests near the corner, angled slightly toward the corridor, as if someone meant to come back for it after a brief conversation. The floor reflects everything faithfully, doubling the quiet. Nurses later said the chair belonged to no one on that floor. It had been retired months earlier, its rubber grips cracked, its left wheel unreliable. Yet in the photograph, something faint occupies it. A thinning shape that does not press down, but seems to remember weight. The blur resembles a shoulder, a bowed head, patience. A clerk recalled an elderly woman who refused to leave until morning, even after discharge papers were signed. She said the hallway was helping her stand. The chair still appears in photos taken at night, always waiting, always facing forward, as if listening for her name. The window, one that learned to look back. Suburban rental home, 1998. It was meant to be a harmless photo, taken by Carol to capture the late summer flowers beneath the front window. The purple blooms had done well that year, and the curtains inside were freshly washed, drawn just enough to keep the glare out. Nothing about the house felt unusual. It had been rented before. It would be rented again. When the picture came back, Carol noticed a face in the glass. Not a reflection. There was no one standing behind her, but a thin profile inside the room, close to the pane, as if curious. The eyes seemed unfinished, the mouth half open, caught mid-thought. She told herself it was glare, fabric, the camera's fault. Later, she learned a child once waited at that window every afternoon, long after his parents stopped coming home. Neighbors said he was quiet, polite, and very patient. The strange thing was this. The face in the photo appeared older than the house, and it was looking out, not in. The smile, before the door closed. Upstairs apartment, 1996. It was taken on an ordinary evening, just before everyone went out for pizza. The room was half-packed, the fan humming softly in the corner, and she had turned in the doorway to smile because someone called her name. Her hand rested on the frame, casual, familiar, as if she had done it 100 times before. The flash caught dust in the air, and the faint crease in the photograph that would later worry them. No one noticed the second face at first. It appears in the wall beside her, pale and incomplete, as though the room had learned how to remember a person but not finish the work. It has her eyes, but older, and none of her ease. After she moved out, the room stayed cool even in summer. New tenants said it always felt like someone had just stepped away. The photograph remained behind, and the smile never changed, waiting patiently for the door to close again. The Man Between the Logs. Northern River Crossing, 1912. They had paused the raft midstream so the photographer could steady himself. The logs were chained tight, slick with river water, and the men stood where they were told, boots braced, hands at their sides. It was meant to show progress, timber moving south, work done honestly and in daylight. The current behaved. The trees on the bank leaned politely inward. No one noticed the pale blur at first. It sits between two workers, neither standing nor fallen, shaped like a man who forgot to finish arriving. It has no boots, no shadow on the wet wood. It seems to rise from the gap itself, as if the river briefly remembered someone it had already taken. Later, records mentioned a fourth man swept under weeks earlier. His body never recovered, his pay unclaimed. The men in the photograph said nothing felt wrong that day. But the blur stays where the chains cross, exactly where someone once slipped, held in place by the idea of standing. The display that practiced standing. Department store showroom. December 1948. The mannequins were arranged for the holidays, placed carefully on a round platform so customers could walk around them and admire the new silhouettes. Their dresses caught the light cleanly, satin smooth, waists precise, hands lifted in gestures that suggested conversation without sound. Paper decorations hung overhead, and the room smelled faintly of wool coats and perfume samples. Most people focused on the center figure, the tallest, her chin raised with practiced confidence. Only later did anyone notice that the mannequins were not posed the same way they had been the night before. One hand had lowered slightly. Another had turned, just enough to seem less decorative. A seamstress recalled a model who collapsed during a fitting years earlier, standing too long without complaint. She had been carried out quietly so customers would not be disturbed. In the photograph, the mannequins appear attentive, almost relieved. They look less like objects waiting to be sold and more like women who have finally learned how to remain upright, even after the store is closed. The Last Matinee, abandoned theater, 1987. The seats were still arranged in careful rows, their red fabric dulled by dust and years of being left alone. Someone had dropped bottles near the aisle, a box torn open as if searching for something worth taking. The balcony sagged slightly, but the room kept its posture, waiting for a sound it remembered. In the center aisle stood a thin, faded figure, barely separate from the air around it. It faced the empty wall where the screen once hung, patient, attentive. Old ushers spoke of a woman who came every afternoon, always alone, always early. She stayed even after the projector stopped. The theater closed quietly. The photograph suggests she never did. The nurse who didn't clock out. County Maternity Ward, 1974. Evelyn sat on the metal cart because there were no chairs left in the hall. The shift was nearly over, the floors newly waxed, the old printer humming as it finished the last reports of the night. She laughed when someone called her name, one hand rising to her mouth in a habit she'd never outgrown. The bow in her hair had been a joke gift, worn only to keep spirits light. When the photograph was developed, the blur beside the printer looked almost like another woman. standing too close, unfinished at the edges. Evelyn said she didn't remember anyone there. She said she'd been alone for a moment, enjoying the quiet. Weeks later, her name remained on the schedule long after she stopped coming in. Nurses swore the hallway felt occupied near dawn. The picture suggests Evelyn stayed, not working, not resting, simply waiting for the shift to end. The joke he practiced. Suburban backyard, 1958. Harold Whitman leaned toward the camera with his hands raised, fingers spread wide, pretending to be a monster for his daughter just out of frame. He wore his work shirt loosened at the collar, tie crooked, glasses slipping slightly down his nose. It was late afternoon, the grass freshly cut, the kind of day meant for small jokes and easy photographs. The picture seemed fine until it was printed. Behind Harold, near the tree line, stood another figure, thin, pale, and blurred, shaped like a man who had forgotten his face. It was not copying Harold's pose. Its arms hung at its sides, watching. Harold laughed when it was mentioned. He said the yard was empty, that he'd checked. A year later, after his sudden death, the family noticed something else. In every copy of the photo, Harold's smile looked strained, as if he saw someone else raising their hands first. The one who stood behind him. Prairie Edge, 1896. Thomas Gray Elk sat calmly in the tall grass, his hunting dog pressed close to his knee. The animal's weight familiar and steady. He held his arrows loosely, not posing so much as waiting, eyes fixed beyond the camera where the land opened wide and quiet. The photograph was meant to show skill and companionship. A man and his dog at rest between long days. When the image was developed, another presence appeared behind him. A pale figure stood where the grass thinned, human-shaped but wrong at the edges, its face faint and unfinished, as if it belonged to someone remembered rather than seen. Thomas said there had been no one there. He said the field was empty, that he would have felt it otherwise. Elders later spoke of a brother lost during a winter crossing, never found, never buried. In the photograph, the dog looks away from Thomas, toward the figure. Thomas does not turn. He already knows who has come to stand with him again. The figure near the tree, suburban living room. Christmas Eve, 1962. Margaret Lawson had just finished adjusting the tinsel when she stepped back to take the photograph. The television hummed with a late program. The dog figurine sat dutifully by the cabinet, and the tree leaned slightly, weighted with ornaments collected over many Decembers. It was a comfortable room, warm in the way houses become when they expect morning. Nothing seemed unusual until the photo was developed. Near the base of the tree stood a small, pale figure, shaped like a child who hadn't learned how to stand still. It was thin as breath, barely touching the floor, turned toward the lights as if studying them. Margaret felt a tightening she couldn't explain. Years earlier, her youngest son, Daniel, had wandered into this same room during the night and never woken the house again. She rarely spoke his name. In the photograph, the ornaments closest to the figure appear slightly blurred, as if brushed by a passing hand. The dog statue faces the tree, alert. Margaret kept the photo. She said it felt wrong to move anything after that. The girl behind the cabinet. Basement apartment, 1993. Laura Bennett leaned back on one arm and laughed, lifting her other hand to her hair the way she always did when someone teased her about posing too much. The room was warm and cluttered. Boxes stacked carelessly. The carpet worn thin from pacing conversations. It was late, but not late enough to stop taking pictures. Nothing felt strange when the flash went off. Laura remembered the moment clearly. The click, the brief white flare, the comfort of being seen. She didn't notice the shape forming near the cabinet behind her. Low to the ground, pale and unfinished. Like a reflection that didn't belong to any surface. When the photo was printed, the face stood out immediately. Small, watchful, unmistakably female. Laura said she felt cold looking at it, though she couldn't explain why. Years later, she admitted the apartment once belonged to a young tenant who vanished without notice. In the photograph, Laura is smiling forward, unaware that someone else has already learned how to remain. The screen that stayed on. Family kitchen, 1984. Walter Hughes was halfway through his soup when the photograph was taken. He leaned forward, spoon raised, eyes closed against the steam. The radio quiet for once. The kitchen was cluttered in its usual way. Jars by the sink, the old television humming softly on the counter, its screen glowing blue, even though no channel came in clearly anymore. At first, the picture only showed a man eating dinner. Then someone noticed the television. Inside the screen, behind the static, a face seemed to form, long, pale, watching from a depth that didn't belong to glass. It wasn't reflected from the room. It faced outward. Walter said the set had belonged to his brother, Raymond, who died years earlier in that same house, falling asleep every night in front of it. After that winter, the TV no longer needed to be plugged in to glow. In the photograph, Walter eats with his eyes shut. The screen does not blink. The Boy Who Didn't Enlist. Field camp photograph, 1863. The men stood shoulder to shoulder because the photographer asked them to. Coats buttoned, hats set straight, faces practiced into seriousness. Captain Henry Walsh rested his hands across his chest and waited for the long exposure to finish. The ground was cold, the air still, the sort of moment that made even talkative men go quiet. No one noticed the child standing among them. He appears faintly between two uniforms, smaller than the others, his jacket plain and out of place. His boots do not reach the ground. His eyes look forward, not at the camera, but at the line of men, as if counting. Henry later said there were no children near the camp, yet records show his youngest brother, Samuel, followed the regiment for 2 weeks before being sent home and lost along the road. In the photograph, the soldiers stand firm. The boy stands too, finally included, waiting for orders that will never be given. The card that stayed warm. Corrèze, France, 1954. Roger Renal kept the card in the top drawer with his good pen and the letters he never answered. It smelled faintly of paper and metal, the corners worn soft by handling. On quiet evenings, he would take it out, check the stamp, the dates, the careful typing that proved he had been there when it mattered. The photograph showed him younger, composed, a man who could stand still for a camera. Years later, when the drawer was opened after his death, the card looked unchanged. But the small photo had darkened around the eyes, as if depth had been added. The face seemed closer to the paper, listening. Neighbors said Roger sometimes woke at night and reached for the drawer, murmuring names he never spoke aloud. The card was returned to its place. It remained slightly warm, as though it remembered being held, and was waiting for hands that still knew the weight of it. The empty chair between them. Sunday parlor, 1968. Eleanor Price insisted everyone sit close so they would all fit in the frame. The lamp was centered, the flowers fresh, the curtains pulled just enough to keep the glare off their glasses. They wore their good dresses, hands folded on laps, knees angled carefully, as if manners still mattered once the camera came out. Someone laughed. Someone looked down, smoothing a skirt. When the photo was developed, there was space where no one remembered leaving one. Between Eleanor and Ruth sat the faint outline of a woman, pale and narrow, her posture perfect, her face turned slightly away. She wore a dress no one owned anymore. Years earlier, Margaret Price had hosted these Sundays, pouring tea, deciding where everyone belonged. She died quietly, the chair beside hers left untouched afterward. In the photograph, the women lean together, careful not to disturb the shape between them. No one is missing. One of them has simply returned to her place. the passenger who didn't exit. Country road outside Chiang Mai. 9:56, Suda and Molly stood carefully on either side of the car, hands resting on the warm metal as the photographer counted under his breath. The road was quiet, framed by trees that leaned inward as if listening. They had driven out to test the engine, to prove the car could manage the hills without complaint. It was meant to be a simple record of ownership, nothing more. When the photograph was developed, a third shape appeared behind the windshield. A narrow figure stood upright in the back seat, blurred at the edges, its head just below the roofline. It did not reflect light the way glass should. Suda said no one rode with them. Molly insisted the doors had never opened. Later, an older neighbor mentioned a woman named Nuan, and who died on that road years earlier, riding home in the dark. In the image, Suda and Molly face forward, steady and composed. The figure inside the car seems less certain, as if still waiting to be dropped off somewhere familiar. Some say these are only old photos. Others feel something still watching from inside them. What do you see in this image? Tell us in the comments. And if these quiet stories stay with you, like the video and follow the channel for the next one.